things. But I took some time today to walk around Boston because I've never been here before. And I was drawn, of course, to the Freedom Walk and found myself in the South End Meeting Hall. And I was really moved. I sat there for over an hour thinking of all the voices that ever reverberated there, and all the people who struggled over the centuries simply for the right to speak. And kind of reminded me of something that I discovered a while ago just about myself. I had an ancestor called Peter Annett, who was a humanist philosopher in England, and he wrote a series of articles, which this is only one of 9 copies in the world. And it was called The Free Inquirer. In 1769, he was a deist philosopher like Tom Jefferson and a lot of the other founding fathers of America. And he challenged the Church of England. He lived in Liverpool and then London. And he was a schoolmaster, and he wrote a lot of articles and gave speeches in the poor parts of London and Liverpool, challenging the doctrines of the church and also challenging the power, the political power the Church of England had. And he wrote these articles, and when he was about 70 years old, he was arrested, charged with blasphemous libel, which is still on the books. In England, they took it off the books, but in Canada, it's still on the books. And blasphemous libel is when you challenge the doctrines of the Christian church. And you can go to jail for 2 years, the Criminal Code of Canada, still, for doing that. Well, my ancestor Peter did that, and he went to jail for over a year. He was on hard labor, and he died with broken health a year after getting out of jail. But I hold his memory close because some people sometimes jest, well, you must be his reincarnation, you continue on the work, or something. But I do feel a real moral and spiritual bond with him, and for anybody who has simply struggled to challenge the murderous actions that are done in our name by religious organizations, and that's very much what we're dealing with tonight. So for me, it began as an issue of simple decency and justice, and it's become much more than that for me. It's become more than what we did to Aboriginal people. It's more and more for me, this has become holding up a mirror to my own culture to ask ourselves, where did this genocide come from historically? What do we need to do in order to make sure it doesn't carry on? And for me, that's more and more my purpose. The other thing I saw on the walk was the monument to the famine, the Irish famine, the Angorta Moor, the Great Hunger. And from another wing of my family that came, my great-grandfather, Daniel O'Neill, came on a coffin ship to New York in 1880 when he was 10 years old. And all of his family died of typhus on the ship, every single one of them. He landed as an orphan and was adopted. And when I was sitting in the healing circles in Vancouver, after I lost my family and my job, I was working downtown Vancouver, helping document the stories of the survivors of these schools. I began to sense that, suddenly my purpose changed. I wasn't there as a minister, as a helper. I was there as somebody who was in the story, because it was my family had suffered the same thing, and there was definite ancestral memories being kindled by that for me. So more and more, I think that that's important for non-Native North Americans to realize that this is our story. It isn't simply something that happened to Native people. They were the latest victims of something that was before them, and which still carries on today. So I wanted to kind of make those comments, for me, put it in context of this is very much, an ongoing story that's not resolved. 2 years ago in the Parliament of Canada, there was a so-called apology made by the Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, about the residential schools. And in the downtown east side of Vancouver, where I worked, we had television set up, so a lot of the Native people who were living in that community could watch it. And there was a lot of anger and tears coming from people, in the sense that, I remember one older woman said to me, they think that that's enough now, just to say I'm sorry, and now they've gotten away with it. And now we're supposed to go back to our lives as if everything is better. And despite all the accolades you heard in the press, I don't know if it was reported, Canada doesn't tend to get reported much down here, but at least in the Canadian press, it was like, what a wonderful thing we've done, we've dealt with the issue, now we can all move on. As if money and apology somehow ever resolves any of this. When in fact what it does is it reopens a wound, it re-traumatizes people, and then the suicide rate goes up, the alcoholism rate goes up. That's what we've been struggling with in the 2 years years since the apology, and the money coming out in compensation. Men that I knew were not drinking for 30 years suddenly started drinking again because all this money was in front of them after having had their story and their heart broken open again by this. So what the white society calls healing and what actually happens on the ground are two very different things, and that's what I want to kind of emphasize here too. So I think what I'll do is show you the first 10 minutes of the film like I did in your class today. And it has something to say because it has some of the voices of the survivors. And the way we constructed this film, and I'm going to leave copies here and encourage you to make copies and distribute them around for the next time I'm here, which hopefully will be on my way back from Europe in April, which is a whole other story I'll tell you about. But because the purpose of the film was to, as one native man said, you know, if you make it about us, no one's ever going to listen to it. And I think the numbers here tonight are an indication of that. And then it's no slight on the people who organize the meeting. I think we're dealing with the reality here that white people don't really care that much about what happened to Native people. But when you talk about what happened to a white clergyman, suddenly that's something that the mainstream can relate to. And sure enough, that's been our response to this film. This film played a direct role in the apology because the apology happened after a member of Parliament watched the film and raised the issue of the missing children in Parliament about a month before the apology came down. I'm sorry, a year and a month before the apology came down. And so the power of truth and situating ourselves in the narrative, if you like, is it goes beyond the sense I often get talking to groups of 5 or 10 people is like, what is the purpose of all this? What impact can we possibly have? Well, the truth has a life all of its own that carries on regardless of our abilities or efforts. And so I'm really aware that the ability to put things on film like that and get it out there has a tremendous impact. So that was kind of the purpose in making the film, to allow all of us to see our role in this history. And so I'll look at that, and then we can have discussion and comments. And I think because of our size, you know, we can, in a way, it's an advantage having, you know, if 200 of you have showed up, because we can have a more intimate discussion of all these things and talking about what we do with all this. Because, you know, somebody once said that the information and the truth makes us responsible for for what we're going to do now to carry on. And so I thank you all for coming, and we'll watch this and then we'll talk.